So, speaking of empiricism, in school, many of us were taught that something was called the scientific method. The steps were one, formulate a hypothesis, two, do an experiment to test the hypothesis, three, decide whether the results support or refute the hypothesis. What seems to happen in science today is that the hypothesis or model people start with sets the limits about what they are willing to think about. It becomes a rigid filter through which they interpret experimental results. When many scientists start working on the same hypothesis, they can even become invested as a group in it being true and seemingly unwilling to refute it. In this way, the obligation to have a hypothesis can become a tool for perpetuating scientific dogma. How do you see the role of the hypothesis, and do you think it is possible to do science without hypotheses or models?
Well, I love the two-part question. To start with part two, is it possible? Yes, but not with the system we've got currently. So obviously, it's possible to do science, but we're going to need a new kind of science. So because Western science is off the bat making some assumptions about that there is no such thing. See, I said it. I'm already biased against objectivity. I know objectivity does not really exist, but that is part of our Western science, that you can always, Western science, because they've accepted this objectivity assumption, they believe you can step in the same river twice, that 2 + 2 always equals 4. There's no exception. That everything is a machine, it's mechanistic, it's mechanical by nature. They don't even notice they've stepped into that quagmire. It's gone unnoticed because to them, the map is the territory. 2 + 2 is 4. And therefore you can step in the same river twice. Any indigenous wisdom keeper knows you can never step into the same river twice. Therefore, 2 steps into, it's not even the same river. 2 steps into a river, even the same river, it's 2 different steps. 4 steps, who knows what could happen. It's not the same. 2 + 2 is not 4 because it's just not. And this is where it gets into quantum logic. Quantum logic is naturally challenging that. But going astray from your questions. I love your very logical, methodical questions because this is where the dialogue happens. You can see the magic, and thank goodness for your show. I think you're doing such a service to humanity by bringing this marriage of 2 perspectives together. Beautiful. I love it. So the hypothesis that you started with, the scientific method, I made a note here. I wrote down, you mentioned the hypothesis sets limits based on filters that they're not even aware that they're doing. That's exactly it. And if the people who are proponents of this Western scientific method, because it's all we've got, and so let's not tear it down too fast, maybe until we have something to replace it. So I'm not advocating chaos. Yeah. I'm recommending let's start looking for some new kind of, I think we're going to need a new mathematics that's based on process, not so much on these little points and things that are very Euclidean. They're very imaginative, from the imaginal realm that Henri Corbin talked about. So they're imaginary numbers, even though they may be what we call non-imaginary numbers. They're all imaginary. And they represent things, but they're not to be confused with what really is. And they've worked really well for us. But the assumptions that are going wrong, I start with the objectivity assumption because it's key to what I've been noticing with reality shifts and quantum jumps, and also because as we move into quantum computing, quantum technologies, we're starting to see the basis by which this whole scientific method and that cycle you're pointing out with the hypothesis conundrum, it's about to be laid bare for those that are looking closely. Not everyone's seeing it, but I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing it in the in the evidence brought forth by these experiments about the Wigner's friend paradox. I don't want to go into all that, but there's some really clear and it's ever increasing evidence that shows that not only can 2 observers be in the same place at the same time observing 2 different things, but each of those separate observers may have differences in their own histories with what they think happened and what happened in their own histories. It's an extremely interesting time to be alive. It's unsettling for those that are threatened, and you pointed out some people really feel like they have to stay with these beliefs and the scientific way of doing things, but we're bigger than that. Each one of us is stronger than that, bigger than that, and I think we're made for these times. We're made to expand our minds beyond these limiting precepts, even the limiting precepts of modern Western scientific method and the assumptions that go with it. And a lot of them are being broken right now, lots by quantum physics, because we know everything's quantum at the very core. That means quantum physics denies a single history. The implications of just that single statement are profound. I mean, we could spend the whole hour just talking about that. This is a huge, huge subject.
Well, maybe we'll have to have another conversation in the future.
That would be wonderful.